Hi guys, so we're group 30 and today we're going to be talking to you guys about debt. And the reason being is we kind of want to inform you guys on what debt is, so how you guys can avoid it and so forth. So first off, we have to kind of understand what is debt. So the economical definition is when one party borrows from another. So this essentially means taking a loan of some sort, which I'll get into further detail later on. So it's a very common occurrence. I don't want anyone to feel as if, this isn't common. A lot of people need it for any type of cases that they need. For example, in businesses like engineering businesses need to start up and they don't necessarily have the money right in their pocket. So they're going to need to take a loan from a trusted source, such as a bank. Now, these two parties will come to an agreement and they'll say that, you know what, you have to pay this amount of money that you've taken by this time. And now there might be interest rates. So this is the act of a loan. But once you take this loan, you will technically be in debt. Of course, you must pay it in time or else there will be high interest rates and so forth. So it's a very common occurrence and it happens to a lot of people. And later on in the presentation, we're going to be talking about the positives and negatives of debt, the types of debt in engineering and in a real life scenario, and the causes and many more.
People get in debt in a lot of ways. One way is during emergencies. People are required to spend their money during unforeseen cases, like purchasing goods during the coronavirus pandemic, or losing their jobs and being behind on their bill payments. Another very common way people get in debt is bad spending habits. This could include frequent purchases of material goods or other things you don't really require. To relate this to economics, many companies take on debt for the same reasons. For example, during the coronavirus pandemic, companies were forced to take out loans to prevent themselves from going out of business. These loans then turn into debt, which they have to pay back at a later date with interest, which we won't cover in this video. These businesses are now receiving even more loans from the government, putting them further and further in debt. The most dangerous thing about debt is that one of the main reasons companies go under is that they take on so much debt and loans that they can't pay it off and that they eventually go out of business.
So, as Keon has mentioned, we surely understand that debt is very serious and it can get you in a very bad situation. Some common examples are house loans, credit cards, lack of funding, such as companies. A example in the real world that might happen to you is going to the grocery store and buying products for, let's say, $100 or $900. You find that you're okay at that certain point, but when the monthly payment comes in and you can't afford it, interest rates start building up. An individual then will approach a loan from a bank, which also puts them in a bigger hole, and the cycle keeps continuing from there.
There are a few different types of debt that we'll cover. The first is secured. This type of debt is one that is attached to a physical item, meaning that there is collateral. Any money that you borrow is backed by that physical item, it being a car, boat, or even a home. In this case, the lender determines the interest rate by looking at your credit score and borrowing history. They also place claim on the item. By claiming ownership, this allows them to take back the item if you stop paying. This type of debt is low risk to the lender, but high risk for you. The second type of debt is unsecured debt. Unlike secured debt, there is no collateral in this case. Examples of this type of debt are student loans, medical bills, and personal loans. In this case, since there is no collateral, the lender gives money at a higher interest rate since they can't repossess your school degree or your broken leg. Since this is a high risk loan for the lender, you could face lawsuits if you miss payments. The next type of debt is revolving. This type of debt is basically an open line of credit. It involves entering a cycle of borrowing and paying back money for you to just end up borrowing more money. With this type of debt, you can borrow up to your credit limit and make a small payment every month. As long as you make this minimum payment by the specific date, you can keep spending. The main example of revolving debt is a credit card. Finally, non-revolving debt is basically like the previous kind, but the line of credit isn't open, meaning there is only one loan that you can make payments for each time period. For example, mortgages allow you to take out a loan to pay off your house, but instead of paying it back right away, you give it back in installments with interest. On this type of debt, the interest racks up very fast, so it is best to pay it off quickly. In engineering, debt is very prominent. There are a lot of similarities between engineering and economic debt. As we know, there are many small businesses or firms of engineering that require funding for the space needed or for the technology and overall supplies to run. As a result, the owners and overall businesses must take out a loan in order to pay for these items. This now puts them in debt and they must work towards paying off the necessities for the company to run. In a lot of cases, this debt is eventually paid off using their income or from third-party funding. But there are many examples of companies going out of business because of their inability to pay it off.
The differences between engineering and economical debt is scarce, but we can still pick out some things. Engineers go into debt for different reasons than economists, like gaining funding for a project that requires approval, requiring more materials for a project, or even paying off lawsuits. In economics, the debt is different. The loans are usually for purchasing more supply or bringing in a product to the market. Other than that, engineering and economic debt is quite similar. There are many applications of economics for engineers. Some examples of economics for engineers is creating a business or creating products of high volume or low volume production. The reason as to why you need to know economics is because you are designing the product, you must outweigh the benefits and costs. For example, adding the latest technology in a product is a huge benefit. However, it will make the product less economical since it will drive up costs of the product. Secondly, you must balance the initial investment made to create the product to determine if it's going to make money in the long run. You could spend a lot of money in R&D of the product, and when you release the product, you don't make up for the initial investment made. Therefore, you are losing a lot of money, which is why engineers must know and understand economics to make correct design choices. Engineers will mainly only focus on budgeting and planning, as that will encapsulate all the economics the engineer will use.
So now that you have learned what debt is and the different types of debt, let's talk about how to avoid getting into debt and how to get out of it. There are many ways to avoid getting into debt. An example would be creating budgets. Budgeting monthly expenses will track the money coming in and going out. This will allow you to store extra money into savings for later use. In addition, this allows you to see what expenses can be cut if needed. The number one way to avoid debt is before buying something, ask yourself if you can afford it without a credit card. Since credit cards allows you to buy things that you may not afford. Another tip to avoid debt is by cutting out all the wants, paying for only necessities. Now that you have learned some ways to avoid debt, let's talk about how one can get out of debt. Again, one can use a budget to save up money to pay back loans, and furthermore, one should change their spending habits. Spend less money and earn more money. Cutting unnecessary purchases and starting side gigs where you can earn extra money. For example, walking people's dogs. Hopefully, you've learned something about debt. Thanks for watching.